So our first step in our troubleshooting theory is to identify the problem. Now, there's more to identifying the problem than just saying, oh, I don't have an internet connection. We need to determine as much as possible why this problem has happened, what kind of background we have on this issue, and what other symptoms may be occurring that may indicate that just not having an internet access isn't really our problem, isn't the root of our issue. So we need to identify the problem. This includes things such as information gathering, where we ask questions like, is this the first time this problem has occurred? Is there, what was going on when this problem happened? Did we just open the internet browser and then we had no internet? Or were we working in the internet and then we had an error pop up and now we don't have internet access? And also, what recent computer changes may we have? Did we move our computer to a new location? Did we change out the network interface card or change out some cabling in the walls behind the computer? So these are all questions that we want to ask when we're gathering information. We want to identify all the symptoms, not just one particular symptom. We may not have internet access, but we may notice that we have a small triangle with an exclamation point over our internet connection, or we may have our flashing light above where the light for our wireless signal is. So we want to check all the symptoms and see if we can identify multiple symptoms which might be related to our issue. If we're not actually the person using the computer and who's experiencing the issue, if we're assisting someone else, if we're working on another person's computer, then we need to question the user of the computer as to what's going on. We want to ask them all of our questions from our information gathering, but when we're questioning our users, we don't want to just talk to the single person using the computer. Especially if it's a network-related problem, we also want to get information from the people working around them or working near them. If they can't access the internet, but the person next to them can, then that dramatically changes the way we're going to troubleshoot. If no one in their office can access the network, then we're now dealing with a network issue. We're not dealing with a single computer issue. So talking to not just that single person, but talking to multiple people around them will also help us in our troubleshooting. And then we have determining if there's any changes. Now, we talked about if there was any recent computer changes, but there may have been recent changes to our network. We want to talk to our users, we want to talk to the people around them, but we also want to talk to possibly our other support technicians. We may be working on our computer and then we say, well, let me check with our network technicians and see if there were any recent changes in the network. And then we're talking to them and they say, oh yeah, we just recently changed some settings on our DHCP server, or we just recently modified some address reservations, or we recently modified some MAC access lists, and we say, oh, okay, maybe there were some issues when they were making those changes. We would definitely want to target recent changes and recent environmental changes to our computer and our network when we're troubleshooting issues, because a lot of times those changes are related to those issues. So after we identify our problem, we gather our information, we identify our symptoms, then our next step is going to be establishing a theory. So let's say in our information gathering stage, we come up with that our user isn't able to access the internet. We go through our information gathering and we say, okay, is this the first time that they can't access the internet? And they say, yeah, this is the first time I've noticed in a while that I haven't been able to access the internet. And the time before that was an unrelated issue with my cable not being plugged in. And we know their cable is plugged in this time. So we identify some symptoms, and not only can they not access the internet, they can't access our network at all. They not only can't access Google and Yahoo, but they can't access our internal servers either. They can't access our sales server, they can't ping our printers, they can't access other people, they can't access our network at all. It's like their cable's not plugged in, but it is plugged in. Then we question other users. We say, okay, well maybe there was a switch that went bad, or maybe there was a router or a bridge that went bad that's connecting this office to our network. And we talk to the other people on our network and they say, no, I'm good too. This is the only person who's having an issue. And we determine if there was any recent changes. We call our network people. We talk to this person in general, and they say, yeah, well, there was someone who was making some changes on my computer, and they were checking out some of my IP settings, and they recently changed that to help me access some different network settings, or some different network components. And so we say, okay, well maybe it's in those IP settings. So we've determined some changes. So we're going to move on to our next step, establishing our theory. So when we establish our theory, the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to do our research. Our research has included identifying the problem and talking with the other people and other users, but we're also going to research previous documentation. Maybe if we're working on a help desk environment, or we've documented some of our other issues that we've encountered, we have some sort of database that we can go to and we can pull up previous help tickets. If that's the case, then we may be able to do some searches and see if there's anyone who's had any similar issues, and we can check their documentation. We also may be able to check our manufacturer's documentation. If we're experiencing an issue with a particular device that has a manual or has some documentation associated with it, or a website like Dell's manufacturer website, then we want to check all the documentation. And we can also check online. There are thousands of forums and groups and websites and locations such as TechNet, Spiceworks, many other different locations where you can go to in order to find information, talk on forums, and then get a better idea of what may be going on with a particular issue. So we can check online too. And then we want to question the obvious. So when you're troubleshooting an issue, you don't want to immediately jump to crazy far-reaching conclusions. When someone says, oh yeah, I can't access the internet, we don't want to immediately jump to the most difficult thing to troubleshoot and the most difficult thing to identify. We don't want them to say, oh, I can't access the internet, and then say, well, maybe it's your setting in your host file, or a setting on our DNS server is incorrectly configured, or one of our forwarders down, or maybe our router has a misconfiguration and its routing protocols and we need to check the routing tables. We don't want to jump to crazy far out conclusions. Now, we may want to jump to those conclusions if there has been a recent change. Say, for example, we call up our network team and they say, oh yeah, we've been installing and we've been replacing some routers in that department. We've been replacing some routers over there. And then we say, okay, well maybe we want to check out the routers then, or we want to check out some of our configuration dealing with those routers. But we want to check the most logical and easiest solutions first, the things that make the most sense and are the simplest. So I can't access the internet. Well, is your cable plugged in? Is your wireless switch turned on? Things that would be the most logical first things to check. And a lot of times that's the cause of the problem. We have those rare situations that are less common where we do experience very, very technical, difficult issues. We have scientific guesses that are called hypotheses. Don't think that just because you don't know 100% what an issue is doesn't mean that we can't test the theory. If we have a general idea, or maybe we have no idea, then we can say, well, let me just create a hypothesis and run with it. Because at least in testing that hypothesis, we'll know what isn't the problem. That may seem kind of moot. That may seem, well, why am I wasting my time? Well, you're not. The more you know about it, the more you know about a problem, the more troubleshooting you do on a problem, the better. Because the more information you can have if you need to escalate it, or if you get lucky and maybe you are troubleshooting a particular problem that I'm not sure if this is the issue or not, and then you go along and you say, well, this wasn't the issue, but this led me to other conclusions to revise my hypothesis. So it's very important to not be 100%, even if you aren't 100% sure, just take your most logical hypothesis and run with it. And we want to eliminate the most with the least. What we mean by that is we want to eliminate we want to do what we can to eliminate the most possible causes of our problem with the least amount of resources and effort. Now, this isn't because we're lazy or we're cheap, but this is because a lot of times these are going to be the fastest things to rule out. I don't have internet access. Well, is your cable unplugged? We can typically check just by looking and see if our network interface card is flashing to see if their cable's unplugged. Is your cable unplugged? Is your wireless switch turned on? We just eliminated physical connectivity issues with just a quick glance, and we saw that their network interface card was blinking. Or we just eliminated our wireless network card being turned off with one quick glance. So we want to eliminate the most possible causes with the least amount of time, effort, and resources poured into that one possible solution. So when we eliminate the most with the least, we're just taking the least amount of troubleshooting time and effort and resources that we can to eliminate certain issues. So we've established our theory. Now, when we eliminate the most with the least, that's going to be at our next step where we actually test our theory. But when we're establishing our theory, this is where we're creating our working hypothesis. This is where we're creating our initial theory that we're going to test in our next steps.